This is just going to be sort of a short one involving some questions and answers, as I'm in the midst of 3 big jobs right now, and none of them were kind enough to align with the bizarre weekly deadline I've set for myself in these video releases. So I thought I'd show some neck carving operations and answer questions. You'll remember the Morris guitar from a few weeks ago and its uncooperative neck. I'm getting there with it. You'll see more in a complete video. But as of now, I've got the fingerboard sized and glued on. The head is roughly shaped, and the preliminary shape of the heel has been sawn out. I'm also about to use a router to flush trim the sides of the neck with the fingerboard. This is a flush trimming bit in the makeshift miniature router table in the spooky dark confines of my shed. It's a big bit with a lot of exposure. You have to know which direction to feed, otherwise the motion of the bit might pull it away from you. I'm using the finalized shape of the fretboard, which is already glued in place, as a template. Fretboard hasn't been radiused yet, it's still flat, and that's why I can get away with this. I'm going to start shaping with the heel. I made a template from the original heel and I've marked that on the end. It's important in this case because I want this to fit reasonably well into the shape left in the lacquer on the body. So I'm using the belt sander to cut to the line. Noted American steel string maker John Graven is renowned for his skill in shaping the entire heel of the guitar with the belt sander. It takes some practice, but if you do it long enough, it becomes a sculptural tool. There are a number of ways of going about neck carving. Some people do a kind of intuitive thing where they measure at a couple of points and just use some templates and eyeball it. I've always done it the way I was taught by David Freeman, and that involves taking a cross-section diagram and marking facets that describe the shape, carving those into the rectangular blank, and then adding subdivisions, basically shaving a number of triangles off until the curves are well defined enough that I can smooth them with scrapers, files, and sandpaper. Carving the neck is an exercise in grain direction. Anytime you're cutting curves into a piece of wood, there will be a direction in which the fibers want to sever cleanly, and it's opposite sometimes, which you have to cut anyway, which is frustrating. Now, the shape of a guitar's heel was designed by carvers to make this process as unannoying as the circumstances will allow, but there are still areas when you have to be careful. The first question comes from a person who wants to get into repair work, and he's wondering what tools he should buy and the costs he should expect to encounter. This is something I've thought about at various times. A lot depends on how you intend to proceed. In my virtual best-case learning scenario, you'd begin by doing basic setup work and then gradually expand into more advanced structural repairs. That said, you'd want to start off with a good set of Allen keys or hex wrenches, Phillips screwdrivers, truss rod adjusting tools. You'd want some decent flat files, a straight edge, a 6-inch or 150 millimeter machinist rule with small divisions for measuring action, or you could get one of those action height gauges available from Luthier suppliers that have a bunch of different increments on them. You need some feeler gauges. To do decent setup work, you're going to have to work on nut slots. So nut files are probably the biggest expensive initial investment that you really can't get around. You need decent nut files. What's next? Fretting tools, nippers, hammers, specialty files. After that, electronics stuff. Then you're into specialty woodworking items like chisels, planes, marking gauges, a Dremel or similar rotary tool with a base. Then it's on to full-scale routers, a bandsaw, sanders. There's no end at that point. The thing is, it's all incremental, and it doesn't make sense to try and buy it all at once. Most people couldn't afford to do that. And there's stuff that I use weekly, but only because I've worked up to it and it complements my style of working. Another person might use it once in 10 years. To begin the setup work, you're looking at probably $500 or $600 worth of stuff. To do basic repair things efficiently, the stuff that most repair shops encounter, it's more like $5,000. Now, a lot of operations could be done by hand with very little tooling, but it would take too long to be profitable. And at the end of the day, you need like $10,000 to $15,000 worth of tools on hand, in case they're necessary. The next question I get asked a lot is, why don't you have a Patreon? You should start a Patreon. All the cool kids have a Patreon. In the footage here, you see that I'm marking out the facet lines to begin carving. The answer is I wouldn't feel good about taking subscription money without providing some additional content over and above what I put on YouTube. And I just don't have time to make that. I have a Patreon account, which I use to subscribe to Ian Hates Guitars. Mr. Davlin there provides a whole lot of access to skill building info and interviews with other repair people. That's the baseline in my mind, and I can't do it better than Ian, so I'm just going to let him do that. Sometimes people send donations out of the blue to my PayPal, and that's not something I encourage because it's sort of a gray area at tax time. I do try to run an above-board business. Revenue from international sources for which I have no paperwork, it gets sticky. So, all I really need is, the likes and subscriptions from the channel here, and that's enough. You don't have to send me money. Here I'm using a spoke shave, which at one time in the olden days was used to make the spokes on a wagon wheel. I'm paring down and trying to keep the facets flat and straight. Around the headstock junction, I've switched to a smaller shave with a wooden body. This is a low-angle tool made in Indonesia and just keeps me from running into the headstock, tighter places and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, these things are no longer carried by the supplier where I used to buy them, so don't ask me where I got this one because it's not going to help you. Here I'm getting into carving the secondary facets, and you see that I've padded the heel. This prevents me from putting dents into the nice sharp line at the point with the back of the spoke shave here. Don't want to ruin my nice carving. Next question. Which YouTube Luthier channels do you like to watch? I don't actually watch a whole lot because when I'm not luthing, I need to think about other things to remain sane and balanced. I'm subscribed to Chris at Highline Guitars. He's a thoughtful kind of guy. I watched a lot of Ben at Crimson Custom Guitars when he was just sort of starting out his business. To be honest, I tend to pay attention to the amplifier techs a lot more these days because it's something I'm not that well versed in and I want to learn. So I like Psionic Audio, Fazio Electric. Uncle Doug, when he was putting his stuff up, he was great. I watch The Guitologist when Brad isn't in one of his more conspiratorial moods. I'll still watch Dave's World of Fun stuff if I have some time, but mostly I watch videos about people living in their van or making boots or digging up mass graves or like owl fledglings in their nest, that kind of stuff. And finally, if you could own one vintage guitar, what would it be? This is a trick question because there are too many answers. Are we talking as an investment or something to play? Because for investment purposes, just give me the 59 Burst. I don't spend a whole lot of time playing, and if I was going to play electric, I'd be happy with a Mexican Telecaster with a humbucker in the neck position. For flat top guitars, I think you could convince me to take on a J45 from the 1950s. Also, maybe a cherry red dot neck 335. I've always been fond of those. I don't have a big collection of guitars. I just have a few, and they're the ones I've been playing for a very long time, mostly. So it's not like, I could do a video showing them all off because you'd be unimpressed. At this point in the proceedings, it's just a whole bunch of scraping and sanding to refine the shapes and the transitional areas and smooth everything down. I continually feel the surface because bumps and lumps are easier to feel than see. Preliminary tests in the hand suggest this feels very similar to the original neck. I won't really know until I've got the fretboard radius and the frets installed, but right now it feels pretty good. So we'll leave it there for this week. No outro music this time. Thanks for watching.